Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's the Three Stooges, brought to us by Activision. The Three Stooges was originally released for the Amiga and Commodore 64 before receiving its port over to the NES, which was actually handled by Beam Software. The game starts off with a humorous intro before we get into the game itself.
We're in the wrong game. Hey, this looks like a kid's game. You imbeciles.
The game can be played 1 or 2 player, and your main goal is to get as much money as possible in order to help the orphanage. To do so, you have to complete a variety of different minigames. It works sort of like a board game. Basically, you have the events on each day available to you, and then a hand will keep going back and forth. If the timer runs out before you've hit any buttons, you'll then stuck with whatever the event the hand landed on last. However, you can stop it at any point to try to get the event you actually want. The hand starts off moving pretty slow so you can get the events every time you want, and then increases in speed the farther you go in. You have a total of 30 days to get as high of a score as possible. The game actually features multiple different endings based on the amount of money you're able to earn, with the best ending costing $20,000 in order to get it, and that's what we're going to be going for in this run. The first event I'm doing here is the waiter game, which is the pie fight. Here, you control the Three Stooges on the right side of the screen and have to lob pies at the guests that are at this dinner, and you have to do your best to try to avoid getting hit by the pies yourself. You have the upper left corner represents the score that you've currently earned, the amount of money that you've gotten for smacking people in the face with the pies, and in the upper right corner is the total health you have left, basically the amount of pies your Stooges can take before the game is over. You are rewarded the amount of money if you do end up getting too many hits done. However, if you keep going, the game will eventually end as you run out of pies and you'll receive a bonus if you're able to survive. The controls are really hard to describe. You basically have to use the D-pad to select which of the Stooges you want. By pressing a arrow on the D-pad, one of the Stooges will duck, and this indicates which ones you're controlling. To throw the pies, you use the D-pad after holding down either A or B in order to lob a pie using that particular Stooge. It is very difficult, and because Stooges are controlled with up, down, and left and right, it can be difficult to get multiple Stooges to duck at the same time, though I have found a strategy. If you hold down one button and then gently switch over to the other one right before the other pie hits the other Stooge, sometimes you can get it to go so that you don't end up taking 2 pies to the face and you're able to duck both of them, but it's difficult. The game is not one of my favorites for sure, so I just wanted to show it off first right away with as high of a score as I could get, because I'm not going to try to get it again during the course of the game. On day 2, I end up landing on the cracker eating game. Now here, your goal is to eat as many crackers as possible before the oysters end up eating the crackers in your bowl. You're rewarded $10 for every cracker and $50 per bowl that you're able to clear. The way that this ends up working is when you start off a bowl of soup, you have all these crackers in it, and the oysters will slowly come up and start to eat the crackers. If you're quick enough and the oysters are coming up, you can actually grab the cracker and take it away from the oysters so that you end up saving that one. However, basically every oyster cracker that's eaten will end up being gone from the next bowl of soup that you end up getting. And you're able to clear as many bowls as you possibly can, earning a lot of money in the process. So basically, if an oyster eats a cracker, that means there will be that many less crackers on the next bowl, and you can get it down to just 1 cracker per bowl, and because of this, you can really rack up a lot of money quickly, because you're going to be getting $10 per cracker, as well as $50 for clearing the bowl, even though there's only 1 cracker in it. It's a little confusing, but you get used to it pretty quickly. The control of the spoon also takes some time because it's very weighted, and moving it quickly can be difficult, especially trying to get it into angles, diagonal directions, and being able to clear large distances in the bowl as fast as possible. Every time that you do end up clearing a bowl of soup, though, it ends up making the oysters move a little bit faster, I think, so you have a little bit less time in order to grab the crackers, so eventually you're going to end up having the oyster grab a hold of them. Also, sometimes, because of the starting position of the hand always being in the same spot every time you go back to the bowl, it can sometimes block some of the crackers from your view. So if you don't see any cracker in the bowl real quick, make sure that you move the hand so that you expose wherever that cracker is, so you're able to grab it and complete the bowl. The worst thing about this is probably the most boring of all the minigames that are included here, other than the random couple of events you get from time to time. But since it's the one that's used to get the most amount of money, it's the one you're going to be seeing the most during the course of this run as I try to earn that $20,000 to get the game's best ending. Thankfully, after finishing a bowl of soup, you can quickly get back into the next bowl right away by pressing the button, so you don't have to see the animation of him getting ready to eat the bowl of soup each and every time. If for some reason you are unfamiliar with the Three Stooges, they were an American vaudeville act that lasted from 1928 to 1970, though members of the Three Stooges would change up as time would go on. The trio would star in 190 short films for Columbia, and this is where they're most well known, and have become an absolute staple of American comedy throughout the years. Three Stooges are always brought up, parodied, and mentioned even up to this day, so their lasting impact is still being felt. Making a video game based on a slapstick comedy trio doesn't necessarily seem like that brilliant of an idea, but at least they do make some of these minigames based on actual Three Stooges shorts, and there's also references thrown in the other areas. There's a trivia game that we'll be doing a couple of times throughout the course of this, and if you're a real Stooges buff, this is probably one of the highlights, as you'll be able to show off your knowledge of the trio. After finally losing the last cracker, I've made $2,170, which is way more than any of the other minigames are able to give you. Next up, we're going to be doing the boxing minigame here on day 3. This is based off the Three Stooges short known as Punch Drunk. In it, Curly's a boxer, and he's going for the world championship, but the reason he's able to fight so well is because he hears the song Pop Goes the Weasel, which Larry plays for him in the audience during the course of the fight, but he ends up having the violin broken during the fight and must find another way in order to get that song playing so Curly can win the boxing match. Basically, the way that this ends up working in this minigame is you're controlling Larry at the bottom of the screen, and you have to quickly run over to the far right side to a shop so you can buy a radio that can play Pop Goes the Weasel. You have to quickly get all the way over to the other side of the screen, grab the radio, and then return with it through the same maze before you end up getting through 6 rounds of the boxing match. The controls are a little bit weird once again, but that's pretty much par for the course in this game. You're able to jump and run by holding the D-pad to the right, of course, to go a little bit faster. You can hit up and down in order to kind of weave in and out of the various obstacles, though a lot of times you're going to still end up running into a few. It's not recommended at all to do jumps near any of the poles because you'll end up doing an animation where you kind of wrap yourself around the pole and slowly fall down, which ends up taking a lot more time in order for Larry to recover and get back to his feet and start running again. The path is pretty much the same every time you're doing this game, so you can kind of get used to a lot of the hazards along the way, and of course it's the same when you're traveling back through the area after grabbing the radio. You have a relatively strict time limit, but once you kind of get the hang of what you can jump over and what you can weave in and out of, it gets a little bit easier. For completing it though, Curly ends up winning the fight, I assume, and he ends up getting himself $600 to add to the money. And this is the same every time you end up completing this game. Unfortunately, it doesn't get more difficult or get more money when you end up doing it multiple times. The next minigame we're going to be doing is the Doctor's minigame. Here, as Mo, Larry, and Curly, you're going behind a gurney that's traveling quickly through a hospital, with your goal being to get to the end and into the emergency surgery room as quick as possible, as well as collect items along the way that will net you an extra little bonus amount of money. You have a time limit in the lower left corner that's slowly ticking down. Your goal is to get to the surgical room before that timer runs out, and the more time that's left on that timer, the more money you will end up earning. Every time you end up running into the various hazards that are all throughout the course of the hallways, you will end up losing a good chunk of time, so it's very important to try to do your best to keep on going. One sure strategy is to remain behind the gurney that's moving in front of you, since there is nothing that can pass through the gurney. It's not like anything can kind of glitch through it or anything like that. But because of its movement, sometimes things can sneak by right as it's moving. It's not a particularly long level, that's for sure, and hopefully you're able to catch a few items along the way and net yourself a decent amount of money. When you start off with a lot of the minigames, eventually as you're going through, it will start to change up and you'll have less minigames available to you and more of the random events, such as bits of money that you can end up finding on the street, or you have one that's called Safe, where basically you return money and they reward you with a bit of money for returning that money. The random events will also net you random amounts of money. So when you get that money bag, it could have $100, $300, or up to $700. I usually don't see any more than that during the course of this. After getting one of those random money events, though, we're going to move on to the trivia game. Full disclosure, I have to use a guide in order to help me answer these questions. I have played the game a lot, so a lot of the questions you see the same ones over and over and over again. The weird part, though, is with the controls, using the D-pad in order to make your selections. You have to hit left, up and down, and right in order to select. So left for A, right for C, and up and down for B. And you hold it, then press the button. There's no time limit, so you could look up a guide and take as long as you need in order to make sure that you answer the questions correctly each time. There's only 3 questions, but each one that you get right ends up giving you $600. I've had a few times where I've done this and gotten the same set of questions in the same game I was playing, even though there actually is a decent amount of Stooges questions that could potentially be asked to you during the course of it. You can quickly earn a lot of money, but then you'll have a few days in a row where you may end up earning only a little bit. There's also a few other things other than these random money events, such as there's the evil banker, which would basically just tell you, hey, you're never going to get the money that you need and it's a wasted day. There's a finger that just kind of points, and that also is just a wasted day, just skips you right ahead to the next one. There's the mousetrap, which actually will snap off a finger. You have basically 4 fingers, and if you lose all 4 during the course of the 30 days, it's actually game over. And there's also a few events where you owe money, so you have to be careful of those.
Congratulations!
One of them is also the slapstick event, which basically just has Mo beating up Larry and Curly. The thing is, though, this actually affects the hand that selects events if you end up slowing it down. As you go through the days, it actually gets faster and faster, making it hard to select the events you want. Doing this will slow down that hand, but it still costs you a day to do it, so a lot of times I just try to avoid getting it, as I'm usually able to still get the events I want, especially if I exploit the cracker game. Next up, we're back to the cracker eating contest. It's the exact same as we did the last time, just trying to earn more money. Like I mentioned before, this is one of the easiest ways in order to earn the amount of money that you need in order to get the best ending. If you have less than 20,000, you can still get a decent ending where you've saved the orphanage. You just don't get the extra little bonus scene of marrying the daughters of the person that is running the orphanage, which is the overall best ending that you'll get to see at the end of this video. Interestingly enough, this game was not only released in the 80s, it was actually planned to be released for the Game Boy Color in 2000, and a lot of work was done on it, and we've seen screenshots and stuff of the game, but it was never actually released. And then a couple of years later, it was actually brought to the Game Boy, but this time the Game Boy Advance in 2002, and they actually changed the opening title screen from the Ghostbusters one to Defender of the Crown, which is actually the first kind of opening title screen for the game on its Amiga and Commodore 64 versions. Activision was trying to heavily promote the Ghostbusters 2 game at the time of the NES release, so that's why it was changed up for the NES version, but other versions of the game have the Defender of the Crown instead being there. Interesting to note, Defender of the Crown was also re-released for the Game Boy Advance, so it makes sense for that to be included in the Three Stooges version that is on the GBA. Though the GBA version wasn't the last version of the game to come out, it was actually ported 2 years after the GBA version to the PlayStation 1. This was in 2004, way after the PS2 had already come out to stores. They decided to port this game over to the PS1. It's pretty much identical to the GBA version, not a whole lot added to it or changed up from that, but it's just funny that 2004 we still were getting PS1 titles. I know it's extremely boring to play this game, let alone actually watch someone going through eating as many of these crackers as possible. It does get a bit more difficult to try to maintain not only your sanity, but also being able to get over to the cracker and eat it quick enough before that oyster ends up eating that final one. But I haven't found a way to really earn more money faster or more consistently than by doing this throughout the course of me learning to play this game over the years. After what seems like an eternity of eating crackers, I finally end up missing one, just barely, but that ends up finishing up the game. We make $2,640, which really adds up helping us make that 20,000 goal, as we're almost 10,000 and we're not halfway done yet. That's basically all there is to the game, is just repeating those events over the course of the 30 days, earning that money. So it gets pretty repetitive pretty quickly. There is the 2-player mode in the game, which will allow you to basically do the same games and the same goals, just you alternate turns between you and your friend, or maybe you just want to feel like switching controllers every once in a while playing. But other than that, the 2-player mode is identical to the single-player mode. Next up, we're doing another one of the boxing minigames here, trying to do our best to get through this as quick as possible. You still get the same amount of money, even if you actually are able to complete it a bit faster. So, as long as you get within that 6 rounds, you're good to go and you'll get the same amount of money. One thing that I think the GBA PlayStation 1 versions of the game ended up improving was in the graphical department, especially when it came to this particular minigame. The giant, humongous boxing glove just kind of punching Curly over and over again against the ropes. It's just odd looking and a little bit difficult to tell even what's going on in the minigame. They made the graphics easier to detect exactly what was being done by looking at them in those later versions. Here now we're going to do a few more little questions of trivia. Here's an example of one that I ended up getting the same question I got asked earlier in the game, so just another free one for me to get. I've also been asked about who collected stamps from the Three Stooges quite often throughout the course of me practicing. Next up is another crack at the doctor game here, doing my best to stay behind the gurney and collect as many of the crosses that basically get dropped, which are the different surgical equipment, I guess, which allows us to get an extra bit of bonus points. I don't have that great of a round here, though, as I end up running quite a bit of the other hazards throughout, so even though I'm able to make it to the end before I end up running out of time, I don't really end up earning that much money in this version, which is just sometimes what ends up happening. It's really random being able to get through here without accidentally running into a handful of different things. And here we get the safe minigame, or safe event, not really a minigame. Just get a free $500 for returning money to its rightful owner. We're now halfway through the days, but like I mentioned earlier, when you get about halfway through, you start to have less of the minigames, and then you'll get more of the minigames usually at the end. There's just sometimes long droughts before you're able to select any of the potential minigames, so a lot of days can get eaten up fast by just getting these kind of random money events and other stuff. I just try to do my best not to get any of the ones that end up hurting me, and at least give me a tiny bit of money, even if it's just finding a money bag with $100 in it. Time for more Stooges trivia.
Congratulations!
1935, they made 7. Ukulele. The only one who did not play the ukulele of the 3 is Larry. Even though it's interesting that he has the violin thing going on in the boxing game. And Gilmore Stadium is the one for 3 Little Pigskins. Get asked that question quite often, as you've already seen it once before during the course of this. have a few days in a row where I just kind of get a little bit of extra money, which is actually a good thing. Thankfully, I should have enough that as long as I can get one more Cracker game, I'll be able to reach that $20,000 mark. The more times you end up doing that game, the better odds you end up having, pretty much, of being able to get to that money mark.
Congratulations.
Time for our third go, though, of the boxing minigame. Nothing changes in it, though, like I said before. I wish it was a little bit more exciting. I wish they would have added some more variety to not only maybe the minigames, but just maybe make them a little bit more difficult if you end up having to repeat them a couple of times. I also think they could have included like maybe a practice mode at the main menu. That way you could have gotten better at a few of the games before jumping in to the main one. But then again, they're pretty self-explanatory as far as what your goal is. If it wasn't for the convoluted controls, they'd actually be even more enjoyable. Thankfully, though, after we finish up the boxing game, we are getting to the end of our journey through the Three Stooges. Only have a handful of days left before we end up making it to that 30-day mark. Day 24, we get another one of the safes, so another free $500. We have less than $5,000 now that we need in order to hit that 20,000 mark. Couple more rounds of trivia for another easy $600. Well, easy $600 if you have a guide with every single one of the answers, or you play enough so you've memorized all the questions. Reminds me a little bit of Adventures in the Magic Kingdom, which is one of my favorite little NES Disney titles, but you have to do a lot of Disney trivia in there, but there's only a handful of questions, so you get to see the same ones over and over and over again. So even after all these years of playing that game, and I know a lot about Disney now, but even as a kid, I memorized like every one of the answers that could potentially end up coming up for those questions. The question mark spot can sometimes be good, sometimes be bad. For example, here we end up, though, finding a money bag that ends up giving us $100, so not really that great of a random event, but it does clear up another day. Down to the final couple of days, and we're going to be doing the doctor minigame one last time here. Thankfully, this time around, I should be able to do a little bit better as long as I get a few more enemies that don't end up getting in my way, or whatever you want to call hazards. Crazy people in the middle of a hospital hallway as you're trying to speed your way through other doctors. It's hard to even tell exactly what the other sprites are on a few of these things. I assume one is just a guy in a wheelchair kind of pushing forward. Another one is people pushing a gurney. Just kind of absolute insanity that's going on in these hallways, with every one of the sets of corridor rooms looking the exact same as every other one. So it's hard to tell heck how you've even made progress, other than you can see the exit at the very end of it, I guess. And while it's about as interesting as a root canal, it's time, once again, for the cracker eating contest, which I will now use to pretty much build up the rest of the money that I need in order to get the best ending of the game. It is pretty annoying that the gameplay constantly stops as those oysters end up eating up the crackers, as you have the reactions from Curly for basically losing each one of the crackers. It's kind of humorous at first that they put those kind of sound effects in there, but at the same time it just ends up slowing down the gameplay because it freezes as you're trying to quickly get to that next cracker. This Three Stooges game is one of those ones that I remembered a lot from my childhood, but it took me a long time to figure out what game it was. You know, those games where you just have like a vivid memory of a game, and what always stood out to me was like kind of the color scheme of the way especially the cracker minigame ends up looking. Just the colors, I guess, was what stood in my mind, and then years later I finally discovered, oh, there actually was a Three Stooges game, and that's what I kept remembering, as I had only rented it, or even I think my parents ended up renting the game a few times, and I actually never really owned it until many years later. After grinding through grabbing crackers for a long enough period of time, one finally ends up escaping me, but gives me $2,240, which should be enough to make our goal, as we have only a couple of days left here. Here we get the safe, which now puts us at that $20,000 mark, so as long as we don't get a bad thing on that final day and end up owing money, we ended up making our goal. For the final day, it's really impossible almost to do it. We do get one more money bag, but since we've already hit the 20,000 mark, no matter what the money bag is, we at least have completed our goal. Once you have finished up all 30 days, you then kind of just walk off screen and you get whatever ending you ended up earning, which in this case, thankfully, we have earned the best ending that you get to now enjoy here.
Congratulations!
So, there you have it. The Three Stooges for the NES. That's your best ending. All three of the Stooges marry the daughters of the person running the orphanage. The orphanage was fixed up, has no money issues, was able to be even improved by the money that was left over. But with that, guys, that's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.